Welcome to the wonderful world of dance, bringing you exclusive interviews with top dancers and choreographers and reviews of the world's best companies across the globe. You can find lots more on our website at thewonderfulworldofdance.com.
Hi, this is Savannah Saunders from The Wonderful World of Dance, and today I'm thrilled to introduce Freddie Opoku-Addaie, who is a British-born choreographer, performer and educator of Ghanaian heritage. He is also the founder and artistic director of SystemsLAB and curator of their upcoming bill. Hi Freddie, thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you, Savannah.
So tell me, when did you first get into dancing?
This year is my 20th year being introduced to more the idea of a dance as a career path, or to literally take it as a career path. So that's 20 years because I trained at London Contemporary in 1999. So that was my first introduction to Western formation of dance forms. But yeah, I've been dancing before that as well. So yeah, so I would say professionally as a career since 2002. Danced with a couple of professional companies. First of all, started as apprentice with what used to be called Random Dance Company, but now it's Studio McGregor, or Company McGregor, as an apprentice, and then toured with the company for a couple of years, and then worked freelance with some artists, and then went back into another contract, another full-time contract with another dance company called Candoco Dance Company, but since then it's always been freelance. And so yeah, the work has been diverse as well as working with artists. Actually, one of them who's programmed in the mixed bill or curated as part of the curation, Jonzi D, worked with him a couple of times on projects, and some of the artists our paths have crossed working on different projects. But
what inspired you to start creating your own work?
I would say, as the critics or the other critical eye would say, the breakthrough work was in 2006, and that's because I had a decent budget to make a piece of work, which helps. So that was the part of the Place Prize. Yes, part of the Place Prize, which is no longer happening. Shame, but it's in the future. And then since then been commissioned by most of the venues or well-known dance venues in the UK, and as well as touring my work internationally. Not necessarily nationally, because the work can kind of been based in London and then do a couple of dates, but mostly in the international aspect of my work, because as a London-born of Ghanaian heritage as well, the work I like to think is very diverse and it's global in its inward and outlook-in perspectives. I think I've always been interested in creating my own work because some of the companies I've also worked for, I have to be honest, the contract did not last long because aesthetically, I think after the audition, you could get through the audition, and actually, I have never auditioned for companies, mostly just knowing the company's work and going to classes. I think there's only been 2 jobs that I've probably auditioned for, and that didn't work out at the end. So it's mostly I've always been making work and trying to find ways to kind of find a language that fits my way of wanting to move. So it's more of a devising process or getting to know Freddie as a performer, not what the tradition of what contemporary dance is known should be looking for. And I think that's where, and I think this comes across actually in some of the artists that, not trying to go straight into that, but some of the artists that, all the artists we curated that, as well as working with some amazing other choreographers, they also really established their own voice, which is very unique, especially when you work with such well-known established artists. Usually when you come out of that company, it takes a bit of time to find your own voice, but these artists, I think, any work I've seen them in, or the ones that don't necessarily have their own company at present, you can see they really stand out as their own voice, which is really exciting to see.
And how would you describe your choreographic language to someone who hasn't seen your work before?
As a maker, we've shifted through, actually I was just speaking to a colleague about a couple of days ago that I think now we're going into the 3rd phase. I think the first decade, which it does take a decade, was more just the physical language, which is more of a hybrid. I am not known, just because I'm a East London born of Ghanaian heritage, does not mean I traditionally do African dancing or hip-hop dance or vocabularies. I've always been interested in the language or the social and the cultural structures of these styles. So I've trained in all those styles proficiently, whether I went to London Contemporary Dance School while I was there I was also training with some of the misters of capoeira, taking street dance classes outside, because as much as the system is not great, not one structure can provide it all, so you can't get the diverse range of styles. So I had to find a way to train myself, and that's partly not helped the bank account in the future. But I think it's definitely been the foundations of how I look at work and how I want, and the type of artists that I want to collaborate with or curate, because they have that sensibility. They know the foundations of these styles. I think I'm digressing from that, but I think it's also just I always say it's about the individual innate voice, and then you try and find a language to try and propel that. And obviously that's where technique, I always say I didn't necessarily go into dance school to go and learn how to dance. Not that, and it's not boasting anything, but it's just say I wanted to do the things that I wanted to do without getting injured after trying it 3 or 4 times, because I think that's what technique gives you, the kind of the craft to be able to do that thing repetitively without hurting yourself. So you learn the way to move through those languages, and that's something I really hold to my training. I think that any dancer will say that they gives you the proficiency, and I think that's what for me distinguishes between the professionals and those who are just doing it for hobby or just enjoy the craft. It's that thing that you'll be able to go to rehearsals, because 9 times out of 10 you're going to rehearse more than you ever be on stage performing, because that's the amount of time you have, especially in the contemporary dance structure or in any form of discipline. I think the style has always been interdisciplinary. I kind of called it, the first phase was more looking at different languages, not necessarily style, the language and the aesthetic of it, whether it's coming through the feet or the upper body, and actually what is the historical background behind the form and what gives it its how do you say it? It's not necessarily its aesthetic, but something that crosses over. And I really do see that in many styles, moving from capoeira to breaking, ballet to what's known as Western contemporary dance forms. There is a lineage. You've taken off the point shoes, you've gone bare feet, but the bare feet was also happening in sub-Saharan Africa. So what are the things that's crossing through? So what is contemporary? And that's not something I really question. What is contemporary dance, and what is known as another type of contemporary dance in another context? So I think for me it's questioning contemporaries in the now, not necessarily specifically to a style or form of dance. Is what's in the now and what things are. The hybridity of these forms is what really excites me. So it isn't a specific style, and I'm not known for that. I think I'm not necessarily known as a purist. So people may, I keep on using that line, Freddie's the lost and found. I'll work with that, that's fine.
I like it.
So it's trying to find a hybridity, and that's been the first phase. And the second phase is mostly working with the idea of the innate, so seeing what's been carved by the human body. So I worked a lot with sculptors. So this idea of seeing the human imbued presence. That's full circle. I think that kicked in 2009 till about 2019. And that phase is kind of coming to its own conclusion. I think the next phase of making is about finding the middle ground between the physical language and the human imbued inanimate object and how that fits in space. So sculpting a body with all these hybridity of styles is something I'm really looking to investigate in the next phase of my work.
I wanted to ask you about founding SystemsLAB.
So actually this was initiated when I was invited by Emma Gladstone, who is the artistic director and CEO of Dance Umbrella Festival, London Dance Umbrella International Festival. And the initial invitation was to come in as a guest programmer, but to also curate. This is where it gets a bit confusing, to curate something that a title I came out with, we kind of collaborated on, which was Out of the System. And this was trying to look at artists that be making work, continuously make work, but not necessarily supported or propelled by the system, but they are partly supported, because everyone works in and out of a system. Whether we work against it, we're working with the system because we're responding to it. And I think these artists sometimes are not in our conversation. So I wanted, as well as curating, which could only be for a certain amount of artists a year, I really wanted a wider conversation with the artists that I know, some that I've known, or other organisations that I've worked with that know that can come around. It kind of coincided with the Dance Umbrella Festival, so they were coming see shows. There'll be residencies for some of the artists that are presenting work, or not necessarily those who are developing work for other venues. So it's just to have a bit more of a artist in the conversation, even if they're not programming a festival or they're not necessarily in conversation with a certain venue. And as I say, just because you're presenting your work in one of the major venues does not mean your work is better than those who are presenting the work in a smaller venue.
Absolutely.
For me, it's about craft and getting support continuously to develop that craft. And I think that's really important. And that's what's been my longevity in doing what Freddie does. I mean, most people go, what's Freddie doing next? Is he a curator? Is he a choreographer?
Yeah.
Is he a lecturer? Is he a teacher? All those things feed into my practice. And I kind of know when I have the itch to get back in the studio to make work, but that doesn't mean I have to continuously do it. Because sometimes that does not necessarily feed the artists' productivity. And sometimes they don't want to be productive in that way or just putting work on stage. It's about retraining their practice. And if you're not supported by an organisation, it's really hard to do that. And also, I mean, Dance Umbrella is one of the most established international dance festivals going, if not.
Absolutely.
One. So I think also having that name was to support the SystemsLAB, and Emma was really up for it. So we have to date about 10 other partners. So it is this thing that is not just exclusively about one organisation and one partner. It's about the sum of its parts is the whole. I think that's really important that everyone puts in, because the artists also put in as well to take part in the choreographic lab. So we invited international artists, facilitators, so those who are also making as well as supporting other artists. In that sense, that's a bit like myself as well. And actually most of the artists are of that type as well, like Jonzi D, supporting other artists through the breaking convention as well as the open art surgery. So yeah, I think it's that like-minded artists, and that's been running since it was initiated in 2016, and we did that 3 times, and now we've had 2 tours. And there's also for me as well as that sustainability and navigating a system that doesn't necessarily, I think, I have to say this, the dance world, when we need to work on doing diverse, not diversity now, because we can have one piece, we can have one from here, one from there, one from there, but if there isn't a through line, people can be left out as a sore thumb, that they're supposed to speak for a whole community or a whole cultural structure, and I think that's really unfair. And it's mostly within the minority or female artists. I think that's really important that we readdress that conversation. And for me, it's also for the work to tour. It's not just the one gig and then that's it. And it's mostly from my experiences as well. I'm not saying the work has always been great for audiences, but there's work that's out there that's not so great that gets a good amount of dates as well. And there's also who's seeing that work, who validates that legitimacy, that this is good, this is not. So all those questions, and I think that's what SystemsLAB is continuously questioning which artists are out there, how can we curate their work in collaboration with them. And I think we found, over the 3 years, we found really good ways of doing that, and also touring our work once it was presented in Dance Umbrella Festival, and supported by the Arts Council and all the other partners that have been involved.
Tell me about what you're taking on your tour that's coming up. Tell me about the curation of that.
So this year, I think this year has kind of rounded up a really fruitful conversation over the 3 years with the SystemsLAB structure. So we have 4 pieces this year, and the first one is THÄO in Art. This piece, Fragility of Man, Part 1. Actually, myself and Emma Gladstone went to see this piece about 2 years ago in its early stages, and we've just been working and developing it. I mean, for me, I think one thing that really brings us, not necessarily to kind of say, what is your favourite? I think they're all really doing their craft, and the thematic or the somatic practice is really important there. But for me as well as how they use the craft in putting the body in space on a stage. It's just, I think sometimes you don't need all the other production values. It's also great to have that budget, but it's just, I mean, if you see the program, you see that these artists really craft their body in the space, and you can see that language belongs to them. I cannot see anyone else performing their work. Actually, even though some of those artists are looking at remounting their work on other body. So THÄO in Art, THÄO in Art space, the Fragility of Man, which I'll just leave it there. So that kind of gives a little hint of the male perspective. And then we've got Becky Namgauds, Exhibit F, which is looking at the female perspective in that conversation as well. And not so what the female in that dialogue as well, but it's not compare and contrast. It stands in its own feet, in its own weight as well. And I mean, it wasn't by accident that these two pieces kind of complement one another as well as through the whole program, but it's the same conversation, but from a different perspective. So that's really sits really well. Exhibit F. And then we have Ffion, Campbell-Davies and tyroneisaacstuart. He's kind of coming more contemporary, but with a lot of hybridity of styles as well. And actually, I would say across all those, Becky and Ffion, Tyrone THÄO as well. This is where I always get Ffion, Tyrone, and Ffion mixed up. His names. Yeah, that's going on. The work is just questioning. For me, it's not. I mean, for me, how I read it is the nuances of the buzzword identity and what are the things that we decide not to talk about, but we can see that things need to be talked about, but it's like the elephant in the room. We just don't talk about it. I think these two artists coming together, and this is a new creation, and it's been a wonderful journey to see those two. This is their first piece together, and then they're also music artists as well as vocal artists as well. So Tyrone is a saxophonist as well. Ffion, a vocalist. So it's just, it brings those interdisciplinary elements into the space as well, which really brings something really special. And they've definitely been on a journey of kind of making this piece together. Because as a maker as well, I know that when you're working with someone you've not worked with before, there can be those dialogues, but I think you can really see that journey that piece has gone in, and it's a work that stands as them two have created a work, which is really nice to see. And then we got a classic. I'll call this a classic contemporary work. It's not, I mean, many people call it classic hip hop piece, but I saw this piece over 25 years ago. That's Jonzi D's Aeroplane Man solo version, because I saw the group version. Actually, I saw it in about 4 different venues. So I saw it at Stratford Theatre Royal. I saw it at the Queen Elizabeth. I saw it at the Place. And where else? I think, that's 3. So that's the full venue. And also seen the film version of it. And for me, it's as he said, this piece should be a museum piece, but some of the themes and issues are very current and urgent right now. And then this is also the question about the canon and beyond the canon of the classics. I mean, what the contemporary dance world knows as the classics is not as diverse, and this for me is another classic work that needs to be seen, not just by the Western contemporary dance audiences thinking we've got this over there and that over there. It's part of the classics. It's as equivalent as any work coming back, like the Pina Bausch, Matthew Vaughan. This is equivalent for me to those works, and the themes and issues that I think will always be relevant. Even 25 years is still relevant. I think another 40 years down the line it will still come across, and I think that it's a full circle with some of the themes that all the other 4 artists, the other 3 pieces are dealing with as well. So I think I only really begun to see that when we started to watch the runs, and then the order shifted a bit of these programs. But I think it really sits well as individually all wonderful artists that have had and will continue to have amazing careers. But this has just brought another way to see their work next to another work and to share those nuances of the current themes that we don't necessarily go into.
Sounds like a great program, and you've got a couple of dates coming up, which we'll talk about in a moment. I wanted to ask you, because you've been an independent dance artist, and as you mentioned, creator and educator, etc., for a couple of decades now. Sort of what do you think has sort of helped with the success that you've had in being an independent artist? It's not always that easy, and you mentioned before, the financial aspects and the different types of dance, but what do you think for you that's really helped in terms of being able to create this longevity?
I don't think I have my thumb on it, but I think the independent sector is what feeds the more structured arts practitioners, and it's really interesting. Actually, I was saying it about middle of last year. Actually, I was away in another festival. I was speaking to one of my colleagues who works a lot with some of these established choreographers, and whenever you suddenly see these performers within one of these established companies, which is a great thing, they kind of go, oh yeah, as if this person discovered this new artist, but they've been working for 15 years, and it's just really, that really shows how far we've come, but how little steps we've also taken going forward. It's like we've taken maybe 2 steps forward, but another 3 back. So it just shows that, it is the life, and it's what do they say now in the creative industry, that the independent and freelancers is about 70% freelancers independents work in the creative sector. So actually they are the life and blood of the structure. And I think constantly you have to shift your perspective in how you work, because if you're invited to work in a certain way, you have to shift. I mean, it's shifting your language. So it's not necessarily I have this template language to work with, so I can take that to every space I go into. It's hard. It's tiring. And I think that's, and I think artists have to find, I've always been curious. I mean, from day dot, I saw a lot of work when I was training at plays via working in the cafe, in the bar. So I think there's also that sensibility that it is diverse. I mean, I say there is no such thing. I think we need to move on from this word diversity and talk about more diverse, because just because I look like them does not mean we are both doing the same thing. So I think that also keeps you curious. Just because we have 2 females or 2 white females, 2 black females doesn't mean we should only have one of them, because they're both saying the same thing. And that's something I really struggle with. And I think, and if I grapple with that, that's always going to be something that energizes me wanting to make work and me wanting to have conversation with other artists. That's not going to shift in the near future. So I think as a freelancer, it's those bigger pictures, as well as trying to find a way to have those conversations through my own craft. I think through that, it has been a journey for the past 3 or 4 years. I've not necessarily been focused on my own making hands-on, but I think that's also trying to understand how that terrain works and how you navigate that for me as well. So I don't think I've really answered your question, but I think it's an ongoing conversation that independent means you are kind of interdependent. So you have to kind of come in and out constantly. You cannot ignore it. That's something that I don't think there's any independent artist that could say, I work continuously independent, because you are funded by some kind of system that's supported by the structure, the establishment, institution. So navigating it, I think if I had the answer, I'd be a millionaire right now, because I could just hand it out and go, here you go, this is how you do it. But it's just, amazing artists that you get to have conversation with. And I think it's also beyond just the non-verbal. It's a dialogue, it's social, it's cultural.
I wanted to also explore the educator part of your sort of toolkit. Tell me about the work that you do as the educator.
I've kind of been teaching alongside, and actually, this has been definitely influenced by all the choreographers I've worked with as well. Working with McGregor, they have one of the most outstanding kind of educational structures going. I think really shifted the way contemporary dance and its educational structure, like really not just being tokenistic, but you are going to work as hard as the professional dancers. And that's been, and then also actually another choreographer, Saburo Tashigawa, who's a Japanese choreographer, and worked with him a couple of times on project. And it's just the ethics, and also Candoco through the integrated practices as well. So I think that's something that I've always had amazing teachers, and actually one of the first dance teachers now is the chief exec at the London Contemporary Dance. So he's also known and had a varied range of experiences, not just this is what contemporary dance, you're just going to have that. I had the Union Dance Company, who's still running, Bully's Ballerinas, who are Lindy Hop Fusion, who else? And then we had Arc Dance Company, we had VTOL. So it's just, for me, that range of diverse education is something I really want to install. And it's not necessarily trying to, as I say to my students, teaching in performing arts course, I'm not here to teach you dance, but I'm trying to find ways to give you the tools that you find your language. So training those techniques, training every technique, but just try and see where the links are. What is the equivalent of a Cunningham exercise on 6? If you take that into the pop-in, lock-in, what is the upper body or the undulations in African, sub-Saharan African dance forms or West African dance forms? So where do you see those links? And I was always good. Actually, one of my teachers in the Cunningham class would say I was always good at the back exercises. As I said, me and Sylvie were not going to be doing that duet because the legs wasn't going that high. Not that you needed that, but I think it's also knowing how to what facilities and tools you can get from these different styles, and it's not necessarily doing what you've learned in the technique class on stage. And I think that's always is the transition. How do you transition that? And that's the question that I'm trying to find a way to just equip these young artists with that tools. And who are you speaking to? What kind of text are you looking at? artist, take the template of how your body moves into a craft artist, someone who works with wood. So the material in that is the wood. How do they carve it? There's a specific way to carve a specific type of wood. The wedging of the binding of the clay as well. That also has molecules. So how do you mold these things together? For me, it is the human body. Obviously, the human body is a bit more complicated, but maybe not, because there is molecules that's also alive in the clay. So I think it's just trying to find different perspectives and how to do that. And for me, it's also about the inanimate object. So what happens to the body when it's standing still before it does something, especially as a physical body. And I think this is where dance also struggles with dealing with some of the bigger themes, because if I stand there as a black man standing in the space, yes, I can write something, but I think people will take a second longer before they start to go, oh yeah, I can see Freddie now. There needs to be a bit more description. But as a physical presence, as soon as I'm on the space, I'm in the stage, it says a lot already. So how do you break that? Or not break it? I mean, how do you deal with those assumptions that people may come up with? And that's been perpetuated over the decades. And also trying to get students to understand that as soon as you stand in the space, you look a certain way, you're certain sex, scientifically a certain sex, or you're supposed to look in a certain way, there is already a lot of information in that space. So how do you subvert that or not subvert it? So for me, that's the kind of tools, and this is where the students don't necessarily do a lot of dancing, and there's a lot of frustration. I mean, I know whenever I come out of workshops, people, I didn't get it, and I feel we need to understand that. If you understand that complexities, it would be much better than going down a long run and then finding out, oh, I didn't know people saw me that way. And this is why I've always been driven to do this type of work. And that's something I kind of caught on earlier on, because the first work I did, so, oh, Freddie, this is well crafted. And then I did something that wasn't quite crafted, like, oh, what's it? What was the feedback? Something like, Freddie better get a move on. And I was like, I've not even started to establish a specific language. There are artists that establish a movement style, and they will work with that for the rest. They will do that for the rest of their career, but they'll also find different ways to collaborate with different artists to give a different lens to that language. But there are artists that will also go into the studio every time they're making a work and find a different language, which is like literally, so we're speaking English, but maybe next time when I'm speaking to you, I'll probably go and learn another language. I can speak in Tree to you, and that's going to create another complicated way of us to communicate. But I'm pretty sure we'll get at least a couple of sentences out, but that takes time. So it's all those things that I'm trying to, the anthropological side of it, the social, political side of it, let's not ignore it. We tend to say appropriation, but for me it's not appropriation, it's just people looking at things and going, this is what this has been established to do. It may have been seen before, but it was not given the respect, and now suddenly, because another different type of body does it, is given that validation. What are the questions we're asking about that? So I think we have to be aware of that. As long as we're aware of it and we acknowledge it, we can start to move forward. And those are the things that I think I'm trying to put a bit more of a lens on when I'm working with younger artists, or even my peers. Yeah.
So with that in mind, what are you hoping audiences take away from your curated show?
I think the obvious things that there are different generations of artists, but I think one thing that's always important to talk about, that if the theme is relevant, it doesn't matter whether the piece was made 25 years ago or made a couple of years ago, or even a work that's still trying to find its voice, as in people are not quite understanding what it's trying to communicate. It will be communicated. There's been work that was made by The Rite of Spring, which people completely hated. All those things we've heard, but it took decades and decades. And for me, it's for people to understand that they don't have the answers, but they have clues in how we read the codes. And I think that's what these artists, is really trying to find a way to kind of talk about the nuances of how we deal with the diverse in diversity of different perspectives, but also they don't all have to be from a different ethnic background, or even if they are, they can still share this synergy. And I think that theme goes right through the whole program. One piece touches on the other, and I think in the end is you would say different sonnets, but you can see it's under the umbrella of these really diverse craftsmanship, and it's crafted in a way where you can sit inside the work without looking for the glitters or the kind of extra bits to kind of validate the work. They're just very good at crafting their own artistic voice, and which is really assured. and it's from personal experiences as well, and that's something that you cannot doubt. And I think this is what makes, even though it's a global, local artistic expression, it's very London as one of the most diverse places in the world as well. I think it really lends another eye to what we're talking about globally and locally as well, especially current times and certain views. What is working together and not working together, and how do we not work together but still work together? We'll work from there, but we'll still work together. And I think those are themes that still comes up in these pieces as well. And is the individual also programming or listening to themselves as well. And I think that's what I'm starting to do as well while I'm watching these works, and go, what is it that they're saying beyond just their own voice, but connecting to the other work.
So my final question then is, what advice would you give to other upcoming aspiring independent artists and dance makers, if there were any sort of words of advice that you would share or that you do share?
I think someone has already said this, but advice can be dangerous. Feedback.
You don't have to give it, that's all right. It's a...
but what is it? Feedback, one thing I've always heard is that feedback is a gift.
Yeah.
And if it's offered in the right way or with the right intentions, you will always accept it. But if it's not, it would just, it will kind of reveal itself. So I think it's also to have that gut feeling, because everything that's happened to date informs your gut feeling. So it's not just a hunch. So I think that's something that we should encourage. The gut really, I think artists, we should always be aware that, you probably get yourself when there's something that you're thinking, I shouldn't have done that, or I should not been in that conversation, but then you go ahead. So I think the gut, because not saying we only do that in the creative sector, but I think there's people are always, there is an uncertainty in the artistic practice. There is always an uncertainty whether the work is going to get made, how we're going to get there, even if you have the budget in place. So I think there's always this, you have to be constantly curious. It's not, we have this amount, we have to make sure that this gets from A to Z. Yeah, you will get to the Z, but not necessarily the way. And it's also dealing with human emotions. There's not articulated yet in a scientific way, because that's what art is. It's not addressing itself in a scientific, and actually science, there is no facts in science, as we say as well. It's only 10 years down the line that something becomes a fact. If something is found, it's not the fact. It's just, this is what's happening. This is the medication until we go on and we experience it. And I think this is what you should experience. Experience as much as you can. Experience everything. I see a lot of work, and as I keep on saying, my bank manager and my savings account is not very happy with me because I see a lot of work, and it's not because I'm into curation, but I'm just curious about what are the other conversations. I think actually there's a lot of interesting work, movement-based work that's happening in theatre spaces, vice versa. So and in galleries. So I think there's also that curiosity, and actually we should be aware that dance is not necessarily for the black box. The curiosity, and also and feedback is a gift.
And I just want to say thank you so much, but also for listeners, make sure you get and see SystemsLAB's Mixed Bill, which is on Friday the 6th of March at the University of Canterbury in Kent, and then 12th and 13th in London at the Trinity Laban. And you can check out all of the details follow Freddie on Instagram. So Instagram / I will spell it, FOPOKUADDAIE.
Also follow the SystemsLAB. We just started an Instagram page because we're also trying to let it have its own space. So I think it's at SystemsLAB.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Freddie. I appreciate it, and look forward to catching the show.
Thank you very much.
Don't forget to subscribe. We've got some incredible interviews coming up with principal ballerinas and renowned choreographers. We love dance and ballet, and we hope you'll love us. Join us on Facebook and Twitter.